Hello and welcome, everybody. Happy to greet you tonight and to also greet our guest tonight, Robert or Bob Lutke. Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Philip. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and also sharing this moment with us and talking about issues of not today's and future society. Let's look at the topic of today. We want to talk about the role of transformative markets in shaping future societies. And today we have the honor to have Bob with us, who's the author of a book called Transformative Markets. And so we will have the chance to first talk a bit about his life story, which I personally find really interesting. So we have the pleasure to talk a bit about where he's from and how he came into the sustainability world. And then we will have the chance to listen to the topic of transformative markets, maybe even a term you haven't heard about before. And so it's great to talk about what it is, and you get the key concepts today. And we try to have a little bit of educational part there, but then we also want to talk about the writing of the book itself and some background information. We have some questions prepared, and we hope you also have some questions for us tonight, so we can share our experiences and talk about important issues of today's and future societies. Round up tonight with some calls to action. You will see some of our work and of Bob's work, and we will try to get to support, and maybe you want to share the word. So this is great for us also, so we can keep doing what we're doing. So let's look at what our writes about himself when it comes to who is who, and then we have a chance to talk with him about his story a bit. So he's saying, my passion is working with innovators and entrepreneurs, creating long-term value for society. I like to use data and research tools to inform strategy for clients so they can achieve lasting impact. Over my career, I've advised policymakers in the US Senate and House of Representatives, taught at the United States International University in Nairobi, Kenya, and provided counsel on sustainability, CSR, and ESG strategies for companies in the retail, oil, and gas, transportation, and finance industry. So again, welcome, Bob. And yes, I have many questions already for you. First, what brought you into the issue of sustainability, and how did your journey, so to say, start?
Well, thank you, Philip. I really appreciate again, the opportunity to be here and to speak to all of us, all of you. And I want to give a special shout out. I see one of my cousins, Carrie Wheatonhaupt, is joining us from Jerusalem, Israel. So Carrie, thank you so much for joining. Hope she doesn't ask me too many hard questions, but we'll have to deal with that as they come. So I unlike a lot of people in this space, I don't think I had this kind of singular moment where I just realized that these were issues of such great importance. I would say my awareness or my sensitivity to these issues started when I was living in Kenya. And this was before we started talking about things like climate change and extreme weather and global warming and however we want to term it. But you could see that this very sensitive climate that was so conducive to agriculture, to growing all kinds of things, wasn't quite the same as what it had been. When the rainy seasons came, it was shorter, yet it was much more intense. And so instead of this nice soft rain, it would rain really hard, and the crops were always at risk of washing off. You saw this growing tension between people, families, the government, and wildlife, who owned what property. Property rights were a big issue. Encroachment on natural areas was a big issue and that a lot of that was driven by families living in an impoverished country trying to survive. And that's because the economy wasn't working. And so the whole system, in what should have been this just perfectly functioning country, the ideal climate, highly educated workforce, just wasn't working. And it was, again, I wasn't using these words in my mind, but it clearly was not on a track for long-term sustainability, let alone prosperity. And a few years later, when I was doing some consulting work, I had an opportunity to help put together a partnership between KKR, one of the world's largest private equity firms, and what it does is it buys and invests in companies and then helps manage those companies, and Environmental Defense Fund, which is one of the world's largest environmental NGO groups, where Environmental Defense Fund was essentially a consultant to a number of companies owned by KKR. And their team helped the companies improve both their environmental performance. They did a lot to get rid of the pollutive side of the production process, track all of that, and then track, frankly, and this was really cool to see, the financial gains, the monetary gains, the growth in profits that these companies enjoyed because they were actually taking care of their resources. They were taking care of the environment in which they were working. And so that was the first time that I saw that you actually could do something good for not only the environment, but society, and frankly, make money doing that. And at the end of the day, in so many of these, the economies we have around the world, we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that to make the world work, we still are driven by profits, and yet there's a balance to be found.
Interesting, interesting. And as we've seen on the slide before, you've been working for the US Senate and the House of Representatives. Well, first, how long is that ago, and how can you explain a bit of this experience, and has this still to do with the book you wrote, for example? Because I saw you have the policy level is one of the important issues in your book. So I guess this has kind of influenced your career right now still, right?
Yeah, I started, as so many people do, as an intern, a summer intern on Capitol Hill, working for a United States senator. And his name was Tom Harkin. He was from my home state of Iowa. And this is a bit of an aside, but what was so interesting to see is my very first experience in government was seeing how government helps people. And so Senator Harkin, shortly before I started interning for him, had written the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was the piece of legislation that gave people with disabilities the same civil rights that everyone else in the US enjoys. It was truly a monumental piece of legislation. And I had the opportunity to work with the group of people that actually wrote that bill. And so here it was, again, the government policy helping those people lead a better, healthier, more productive, more humane life. And none of these people were in asking for handouts. They just wanted an equal opportunity like everyone else. And it was so wonderful to see that. But what it shows is the important role that government plays and that policy plays in setting, ideally, a really constructive framework for how the rest of us can operate, be it as individuals or be it more collectively as a business or an organization.
Interesting. Yeah, this leads me now actually back to where we came from, and let's look at the book you wrote, talking about transformative markets. Something we just talked about now, the frameworks. You just mentioned that there can be a positive framework that government can provide, but we know it can also be doing the opposite. So looking at your book, we will see that there's many aspects when we talk about sustainability, and sustainability in globus or encompasses a much more holistic concept than just environmental sustainability. And you will see also in Bob's book that there's many aspects where we can have action, and this is what I like about the approach. It's also quite practical oriented, if I'm not mistaken, so also giving us the message what you can do or what we can do, showing that the community counts, and every act of everybody basically counts. And now I actually leave the stage back to you. You know much better what the book is about, so share us a bit about the insights and yes, about the background, and let's look at the facts that you also wanted to present us a little bit.
Sure. Well, the premise of the book is that markets for sustainable goods and services, and examples of that are things like wind and solar power, or clothing made from circular fashion, circular fashion, clothing made from in a much more circular process, form much more quickly, much more effectively when four actors in markets collaborate: the private sector, the public sectors we just talked about, the finance sector, which are, banks, investment firms, pension funds, and then the what I call the cause sector, which are the NGOs like Environmental Defense Fund, World Wildlife Fund, organizations like that. And so when these four collaborate, a market such as what we've seen here in the United States around wind power can grow much more quickly, much more effectively. If those four aren't collaborating, you certainly can have markets for a sustainable product, but they never really grow to a meaningful size, and it takes a lot longer for that market to form. And the reason this is so important, and Philip, we can go to the next slide, and this is the concept, put all of the book in context. So in sentence 1, page 1, chapter 1, I talked about Earth Overshoot Day. And what Earth Overshoot Day is, it's the day in which on the calendar that we've exceeded, our consumption of resources has exceeded the Earth's ability to regenerate those resources. So as you can see, in 1970, we were pretty much living in balance, which means that as we were consuming Earth's resources, water, timber, habitats, food from fish and other naturally occurring organisms, they could regenerate. Our consumption was in balance with their ability to regenerate. If you go all the way over to the right, you see in 2019, Earth Overshoot Day actually occurred in July, late July. And that means that from the end of July to the end of the year, for roughly 4 or 5 months, we were living on borrowed time. I mean, that's the equivalent to living on a year's paycheck in the first 7 months of the year, and then living on your savings for the rest of the year. Eventually, you're going to deplete your savings. What we saw in 2020 might be viewed as good news. You see that Earth Overshoot Day actually occurred later in 2020. It didn't occur until late August. Why was that? Well, that's because of the massive economic slowdown that occurred during COVID. And that's the one other constant you see in this trend line, which is in every point in time where there's a global economic slowdown, Earth Overshoot Day backs off a little bit. And that's a pretty cruel irony, in that the only time we start to slow down our consumption of resources is frankly when human suffering, human anxiety is increased. And so this just highlights the fact that what I believe is the greatest tragedy of the day, which is we value our present self rather than our future self, which means that we care more about how we are living in this moment. We care more about how we as individuals are living in this moment than anything that comes after today, or anyone that comes after today. And to be clear, a lot of this consumption is confined to a very, very small number of people. The fact of the matter is there's close to 800 million people around the world living in what's termed by the United Nations as extreme poverty, less than in US dollars, $1.90 a day. So something is not working, right? I mean, if the markets were working, we wouldn't be depleting our resources at this accelerating rate and leaving so many people so far behind. And in the next slide, if we kind of put this into very, very concrete terms, which is obviously last spring, during the pandemic, when the pandemic was really hitting and we were grappling with how to deal with it, there were dislocations and shocks occurring throughout society. But what I found was that a very, very traditional market, crude oil, was one of those markets that suffered greatly. And in fact, it suffered so much that it went, in market speak, it went negative. And that means that people who are producing that crude oil were actually paying the market to take the oil off their hands. I mean, that is the definition of a poorly functioning market. On the right-hand side, you see how the solar market acted in roughly the same time period. And again, the market took a hit, it shrunk, but it never collapsed like the oil market did. And it rebounded. And it was much more resilient to the shocks that we were experiencing as a society. It was much more able to adapt to the extreme pressure that COVID and all the disruption that occurred because of COVID put on the market. And that to me just shows, the very, very stark contrast between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And there has to be something said that that the solar market, which is much more closely aligned to the concepts of sustainability, was far more resilient than what is often seen as the poster child for an unsustainable economy, fossil fuel extractive oil. So how can we save our future selves? And my premise is the market is the fundamental way to do that. The fact of the matter is markets permeate every aspect of society. They're woven throughout the global economy. It is how we make goods, consume goods, we earn living. And so we can't just do away with the market or with markets, however you want to look at it, in the macro sense or the micro sense. And so what we have to do is we have to find ways to make the markets work better, be more efficient, better respect, and ideally add to the human, the social, the natural, and the financial capital that all of us need in order to live prosperous lives. And so, Philip, why don't you turn to the next slide? I define a sustainable market as having 5 traits, and these cut across all the markets for sustainable goods and services that I was able to find. And the first is that they're inclusive, that they create value for everyone. They don't necessarily create winners and losers. And it's kind of this concept of a rising tide lifts all boats. The second is that they're responsible. As I said, they respect the human, the natural, the financial, and the social capital. The third trait is that they're transparent. If you want to market a product as being sustainable, you have to be very transparent in why that product is in fact sustainable. Otherwise, you could either call it greenwashing or simply that you're never going to get anyone to actually believe that your product is actually sustainable. These, as I alluded to in my very first set of comments, these markets are very, very connected across all the actors in society. They work best when those actors are working in collaboration rather than against each other or in isolation, which we too often see in these markets. And then finally, and this builds on the transparency, they're trustworthy. Because of the transparency, they allow the public to trust that the products, the goods, the services being created and sold in the market actually do what they claim to do, which is to operate in a much more sustainable fashion, create much more long-term value for society, and create much broader based benefits for society. And in the next slide, we look at the 4 sets of actors with a bit more clarity and insight into each of the 4 actors. So as I said before, the first sector is the public sector. It's what I call the enablers. The public sector establishes the legal and policy frameworks that create markets. They allow markets to operate over time. They allow all those in the market, such as investors, entrepreneurs, and owners, to operate with certainty, that there's the rule of law, that there's protections, legal protections, and it fosters the environment that a market needs to thrive. Then on the right-hand side, the second set of actors is the private sector. Those are the builders, and that's, basically any company, any innovator, and any entrepreneur. The third sector is the cause sector. They're what I call the validators. They bring the expertise and the credibility to the market. Their role in the market is really important when it comes to that kind of that trust and transparency dynamic that I talked about in the previous slide. Whereas if a seemingly impartial organization says that this market is producing things that are in fact sustainable, it's far more likely to be trusted by the public as something that is in fact sustainable. And then finally is the finance sector. They're the financiers. They bring the financial capital that is needed at all levels of the market, anything from the capital for startups and innovators and entrepreneurs to the investments needed by the larger companies to sustain their operations, ideally in the continuing to innovate. And this is when we talk about finding ways for society to invest in itself. Increasingly, it's the finance sector more than the public sector that actually has capital that can be deployed in all levels of the economy, be it from infrastructure such as roads, hospitals, bridges, and schools, all the way to, again, kind of investing in these startups, these forward-looking ideas that may not play out for 20 years, but they certainly set the stage for ongoing innovation. And Philip, if we could go to the next slide. And when a market is really functioning well, I believe it creates a virtuous cycle. And as Tom Friedman said so well, it's only a market that can create and allocate capital fast enough and effectively enough to drive transformational breakthroughs. No other single entity in society can do this. No parts of markets can do this. It really is the market as a whole able to create this transformational breakthroughs through a combination of the ideas, bringing those ideas into production, creating greater value, which then opens the door for more opportunity. And Philip, if we could go to the next slide. So as Philip alluded to, my book, Transformative Markets, laid out 10 recommendations to foster greater development for markets for sustainable products. And here on the next slide, I touch on a few of them. So the first one is to embrace the influence of networks. The premise is that these markets are actually networks of actors across those 4 sectors, and that the more that we understand, appreciate, and value the ability of these networks to bring together different kinds of actors with different skill sets, different roles, the more we will foster the mindset needed to create the collaboration needed to not only create these markets, but also scale these markets. The second idea and recommendation is to better define what is sustainable. If we are going to hold, organizations accountable for how they create products deemed to be sustainable or how they market products deemed to be sustainable, we owe it to them to bring much more clarity, much more precision to what in fact is sustainable. And that allows, in a good way, ideally, greater clarity, gives them something to aim at in their production, in their innovation, and in their marketing. But also it also is able to provide greater accountability with much clearer guidelines for what is and what is not sustainable. The third point is better public policy. again, without effective public policy, you really are not, you're never going to see an effective market created. There has to be that level of certainty that the market is there and it's going to stand the test of time, and that there are guardrails and guidelines, rules, laws that everyone has to adhere to. Fourth, build better capacity in startups. You really see this like in the fashion industry, in the agriculture industry, a little bit in the transportation and vehicle industries. There is such great passion. There are so many great ideas. We don't really need any more ideas to solve so many of the challenges we face in society. What we need is for those ideas to find a way to scale. And a lot of those ideas are at the startup level. And so how do we build the capacity in those startups to give them the opportunity to scale their ideas, to bring those ideas truly into the market so that they can take hold and feed into our desire to transform society. And then fifth, move to a circular economy. If I could write the book again, I probably would place a much greater emphasis on the importance of moving to a circular economy. Well, I think, this effort that's gotten so much attention, particularly over the last year, to achieve a net zero carbon economy is incredibly important. I mean, there's no way that we can begin to even slow down the growth in the Earth's temperature without removing millions of gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. The fact of the matter is, Earth Overshoot Day will come more and more early in the calendar year, unless we start moving to a circular economy where production, because right now production is just seen as a means to an end. The Earth, the resources, Mother Nature is seen not as an asset that adds value, but rather something that can just be drawn down from to create value. And that's a very, very perverse dynamic that, again, is utterly unsustainable in any kind of setting. And so we really have to embrace in every market the move to a circular economy. And I think, again, if I could write the book again, I would weave circularity much more clearly into a lot of the definitions of how these markets should work and how the actors in the markets should be judged, and how they should really work together to create markets.
Very interesting. I think we can stay just a little bit on this slide because I would like to comment also on some of these 5 points. Not many things you mentioned I can definitely also underline, and especially the public policy. We talked about that earlier, and I also realized, I've been also traveling some countries, and you really see difference in how either, like, especially entrepreneurship, something you mentioned, or startups. Not either it's promoted or it's demoted. No, it's like you can put lots of hurdles in the way to have a startup, and to have then also because funding, or just funding a company is founding one, and then registering it is easy, and sometimes not as easy, no, but that's just one thing. But then having like a framework, no, that really allows this innovation, no, and there's quite very interesting literature on that, how this innovation systems can be created, and this is where we have to look at, not what is the environment sustainability startups, if you want to have a term for that, no, need to prosper, because there's lots of more things than just capital, but that's also one thing. That's always one of the things. But then also, like, you need business developers, you need the network, something even the first thing you mentioned even here becomes even more evident. And then in these networks, you need also the public actors. So the third one. So in the end, we're talking about an ecosystem, no? How things are connected. And and things you mentioned I can really resonate with, even like getting a different connection back to nature, treating it differently. And I'm coming from the permaculture world too, and we always say, no, don't treat the earth like dirt, like how you would say, no, it's not dirt, it's like it's a living organism, so like treat it as it, no. And then from a spiritual part, not even to talk about, no, but treat the earth as something living and take care of it, no, have a stewardship. So in the end, changing the mindset of exploitation to being a steward. So you want to take care of the garden, if you want to say so. And that's why the overshoot is so interesting to say. No, you don't want to even, you don't just want to move the date backwards. You maybe want to move it way in advance, many years, many more years. And that's where the concept of regeneration comes in, no? Because if we just have talk about sustainability or having everything just circular, we can have say, okay, let's stop now and let's let everything circulate, which we have right now, no? But we wouldn't have this regeneration, no? The forests won't grow back, the oceans won't get cleaner, and the biodiversity wouldn't increase. So what we really need is regeneration and not just sustainability, no? So that's why I always say, like, a circular economy, like you say, is like, it's even just the minimum. No, we have to even go much further, no? So this is yeah, I can definitely resonate with many things you said. So let's look at the actually the writing of the book. So yeah, what was your for yourself, like, the main interesting thing that you had experienced while writing the book?
I would say there are a handful. The first probably is the reason I wrote the book, which is that I for a client had to do a research project to understand and define what is a sustainable market. And I was stunned that when, and I thought going into this, this was going to be a very easy project to do. And I was stunned to find that no one had really defined what a market is, what a sustainable market is, or a market for sustainable goods and services is. There had been, precious little research done. The research that had been done was very anecdotal in nature, and no one had ever looked at these markets in a very comprehensive manner. And so that was it, that, like I said, I mean, I was really surprised. I just assumed that, while things like solar power and, the Teslas and, regenerative agriculture, obviously they're not huge markets, but they're enough of a market that I would have thought that we should have had much more, study and analysis and efforts to adopt them more widely. So that was really an eye-opening experience. The next experience was, and this is when I used some of the data tools in the book, was that while the four sectors of the economy, particularly the public and the private sector, were talking about sustainable markets, they were talking about them in ways in which it indicated there was really no collaboration, or very little collaboration, going on between the actors. And so the markets that were being formed were really being formed by the brute force of large scale multinational companies, like Unilever bringing its chemical free products to the market. I mean, that was just Unilever essentially forcing, because of its size, able to force these products into stores, but not doing it in a very comprehensive way. And again, I mean, that will work, but it won't work for very long, and it won't take you very far. And if there's ways in which Unilever could better collaborate with others, I'm convinced that they'd have much bigger markets for its products. And then the final point was just what I found most interesting was just all the people that I spoke to in the book, before the book. And I look at, this guy founded this company called Me Taro. It's in Los Angeles here in the United States. He's making moisture wicking athletic shirts, t-shirts from recycled milk. He distills the milk down into fibers that he then puts into a shirt. And then I found, when I was doing the analysis and we were able to identify, who the most trusted actors were in the network, I came across this woman named Stephanie Benedetto, running a company called Queen of Raw. Never heard of her. Certainly had never heard of a company called Queen of Raw. But she was identified as one of the most trusted actors in sustainable markets. And so I cold called her and I said, I'm doing this book, doing my research, and you showed up. And it's actually fostered this wonderful friendship where she's created a company that uses blockchain, and it's a marketplace where she's able to take fabric that would otherwise be diverted to landfills and fashion designers, people at home, wanting to just to make their own clothing, small fashion houses or any fashion house for that matter, can go and buy the fabric that otherwise would have been thrown away. She uses blockchain to certify where she got the fabric, and kind of how she procured it, and so on and so forth. And that is, just one concrete step of one person helping us move to a much more circular economy, and using technology to do it, and using technology to scale it. And now, Stephanie's using my book and using the images in my book, showing that she's this trusted actor, to go to venture capitalists in her next round of fundraising, so she can scale her business. And so I think it's kind of a neat way that the book in its own little way has brought some value to a really, really cool and innovative entrepreneur.
That's a nice story too. Yeah, that sounds interesting. So, if you then could also type us or give me afterwards, so I can put in the follow-up the names again of the companies. So
Oh,
because
sure.
then we can have it for the audience, because it sounds really interesting to have this, for further research and looking it up. Because now I'm also really curious about this company. And it's really interesting. Like, two things I would like to mention, and then I have also another question for you. But two things before they escape my before they escape myself. One thing was collaboration, and the other thing was the role of technology. Because it's really interesting how you mentioned first that people were doing stuff, but they were not really collaborating. And this points to a quite intriguing fact. That even nowadays many projects, or especially sustainability projects, even where people are maybe coming in with the best intentions and they want to change the world, but projects fail because of maybe communication or facilitation problems, not group dynamics, collaborative work. All of a sudden, everybody should have a say so. Stakeholder management sounds nice in theory, but what's the reality? So this is something I've also identified as where we have to learn a lot. And it's quite interesting that now, even in the European projects, in the new calls that they have for the New Horizon project, for example, they even want to know about personal transformations, because it may even go into that sphere, because having even a circular economy means, well, that's nice, yeah, but maybe we still need to reduce our consumption level, yeah, and maybe that comes in line with even um, personal transformation, even on the consumption level, on the company level, on many aspects. So it's quite interesting. I think we have to learn how to collaborate. That's a bit my point. And I think lots of things have to be done there. Not coming even only up to the emotional level, that even companies maybe have to coach more, so that this participatory environment, if you want to say so, can really come. And not that then again this participatory processes can be captured again by particular interests if someone's really clever and manipulating, and then it's just a democratic voting process. So again, so interesting that you mentioned. So yeah, that's something I really found interesting. And the other thing was the blockchain example,
Mhm.
because many people, they might even think or be in against technology a bit, thinking that technology might even be causing lots of damage, not thinking about minerals, or even that this constant innovation and use of resources, which it also implies can be also harmful in a way. But then we see these examples of blockchain and other examples where blockchain is also used, for example, in mining,
Mhm.
where it can actually uses lots of value added. So yeah, so what is your point on that? What is your conflict? Do you see some kind of conflict there between sustainability or technology, or where do we have to go? Does technology have to change, maybe become greener? So is there work to be done? What's your point on that?
I don't think we can have sustainability without technology. And I don't think that, I mean, we're past the point of no return. Right. I mean, Stephanie and the Queen of Raw, her business would not function if it wasn't for the blockchain technology. And so really the point that we're now at is ensuring that we use technology in a much more responsible, ethical manner. and learn from our past mistakes about how we have not used Mother Nature in a responsible and ethical manner. And I think that's where public policy comes in, where it's not just blockchain, but it's artificial intelligence, it's the Internet of Things, it's all the things that go beyond artificial intelligence. How do we use those in an ethical, responsible manner? And I don't think that, for example, the private sector left to its own devices, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the private sector, but left to its own devices probably is not going to, in a consistent way, use technology in a fully responsible, ethical manner. And instead, again, that's where public policy comes in. That's where the NGO community comes in to help hold organizations accountable for how they use resources, right? And I now put technology as really as a resource that can be drawn upon. And so again, just to, in sum, technology is not going anywhere. Its role is only going to grow. So how do we help it grow in a way that creates the most value rather than takes from society?
Very interesting discussion. Yeah, this could go on and on, but to have another question for you still. So when you think of what comes next now for you, do you have more books or other research projects plans currently? So what's your next move?
I am starting to think about the next book, and that book would actually go deeper into a number of the markets that I find most exciting and interesting, be they electric vehicles, be they autonomous vehicles, because autonomous vehicles have such an opportunity to create value, and frankly, give mobility to people with disabilities, to the elderly population, things like that. The circular fashion we've just been talking about, the different ways of farming. And so really to understand what's going into those markets, what's the transformative potential of those markets, and what's needed to kind of scale those markets. And one of the other markets that I've been looking at with kind of interest is wind power. So wind power obviously is kind of sustainability's greatest success story, right? I mean, who doesn't love wind power when compared to fossil fuel and coal and all that? Well, the problem is no one has figured out what to do with the infrastructure of wind power, namely the towers and the turbine blades on these wind turbines. So each one of those blades for a lot of these wind towers is roughly the size of a wing of a 747 jet airplane. And it's built actually to a higher standard of strength than a wing. And so right now, when those turbines end their useful life, the most common method of dealing with those blades is you bury them in the ground. Those blades are made up of these advanced forms of carbon fiber material. They are designed to last to the end of time. So here you have sustainability success story with a massive Achilles heel. And if the wind energy doesn't get that figured out, it's going to go from a success story to a cautionary tale very, very quickly.
And I'm
So it's
glad.
things like that,
Yeah.
we have to look at these products and in their whole life cycle. And, it's just like these electric vehicles. They're wonderful. I mean, the Teslas are wonderful. But if you really want to save if you really want to benefit the environment, the best thing you can do is buy a used car. I mean, to keep a car out of basically a landfill for longer does more for the environment than buying a battery powered car, where a lot of the electronic componentry, or what went into the electronic componentry, came from places like the Congo, mined by most likely kids working in not so great working conditions. And so there's this constant tension and this constant struggle as we evolve as a society. And absolutely, these electric vehicles, they are the future. And I think more than any other product out there, the electric vehicles are going to finally transform the understanding people have about sustainability, as it no longer is a trade-off between a sustainable product and cost and quality. Like these electric vehicles, they're luxury cars. They're built that way. People treat them that way, and that's going to change the dynamic. But again, they have a cost to society, and we need to be more honest about that, because we have to figure out ways to deal with that.
Certainly agree. And most likely the car itself has to be rethought, no? And the concept of individual mobility. So for cities, for sure, we need to invest more in public transport. And I'm always wondering, no? When it comes to life cycle analysis, I have the same question that intrigues me, no? What's better, an electric car without emission, or really extending the life cycle of the existing car? For me, that's more circular. If you think about the circularity, then okay, the emissions, but that's something that can, why is not technology investing in creating better filter systems or better fuels that can also be done in a more regenerative way, no? So it's only going that way, and that's what triggers me a bit, because then again, you see it's a bit or much influenced also by interest. So yes, the story is not just this one sided. No, and the wind example, that's also funny. It's one of the examples, funny so quote, that I bring up many times in my courses. Many people are not aware of, and that's the problem of not looking at the whole life cycle. The same solar panels can have also big problems, no? But I don't want to point that way too much, because then it's a bit, people can misunderstand and think, okay, so let's still be with fossil fuels in a way. So I'm always pointing, it's still the solution. Let's just make the materials better. They are better.
Right.
The
Just
blades can be
finding a
done.
better solution. That's
Exactly.
easy.
No.
I mean, wind power, solar power are a great advance over coal power, without a doubt. Now the next level of evolution needs to take place, and what I'm curious to see is the market actually able to achieve that next level of evolution? Because if it's not, then again, the success stories become the cautionary tales, and those markets probably get left by the wayside. And if you're a big investor in wind power, you're at risk of losing your market.
I think now we can actually see who in the audience might have questions for us. So we're keen and curious to see what questions you have for Bob. And so feel free to write them in the chat. But if you also would like to turn your microphone on, please let me know. Then we can also give you the microphone. But you can also just communicate via chat. That's a bit up to you.
Thank you very much, Philip and Bob, for being here. I just want to let you know that on my Zoom, it says the chat feature is disabled.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting. I just wrote on the chat. That's strange. I can't see why that's it. Let me see if I find it out, but I don't know why that is. So that's the first time I have this problem, to be honest. Let me see if I can see.
Okay. So I have a question in the meantime while you're sorting that out for Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, first of all, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your service, not only to America but also to the world. This is very valuable information and definitely honorable things to know and to strive for. Your diagram of 4 spheres, 4 actors. We had a diagram that was red and gray.
Yep.
With the 4 spheres. Where would you put civil society in there? Where does first of all, I'm sorry, I apologize. First, can you define what civil society is? And then where does it fit into your model? That's the one. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I see civil society as is essentially the forum by which the public, and knowing that the public has any number of audiences or any segments, comes together to act in kind of collaboration. And so in a way, it could be in the middle. But I think most of the actors from civil society tend to come from either the public sector or the cause sector. And, so for example, someone, of course happened after I did the book, not before, because I may have taken their input on it. But before, had actually suggested I not call it the cause sector, but actually call it the social sector. Because again, the intent of that collection is, it's not just the NGOs, but it's academia, it's the foundations, it's subject matter experts, be they individuals or kind of institutionally affiliated. So, again, had that suggestion come earlier, I probably would have followed that suggestion, because I do think that I may have inadvertently limited the, I don't know, the scope and the potential reach of that sector by calling it the cause sector. So.
Okay. No worries. It's just that that's in my experience with sustainability and research and analysis, civil society is one of the spheres that's in most of the classical diagrams. And my other question is, have you seen Kiss the Ground yet?
I've not.
Are you okay? So the reason I mention that is because you've got the public sector there, and you spoke a lot about regulations and so forth that can come from government, and there's in Kiss the Ground, it focuses mainly on soil and regeneration of soil and erosion and various other things. But one of the things I learned, which I didn't know, is that that there has been since 1933 a soil conservation service, and the Soil Conservation Service has been since 1933 promoting permaculture, has been promoting regenerative soil practices, not only for erosion but for food quality and various other things that we are learning about now. But that's been, a department of the U.S. government for a long time. Yet it's the uphill battle that part of it that's in there that's mentioned is that there's other government subsidies and other government that are making it, let's say, more inducive for people to use chemicals and to claim, oh, I have a guarantee if I use chemicals that if I don't have a good crop, then I'll get paid off. Yeah. So whereas now it turns out, after I've seen this and the other things, that soil can be one of the great carbon captures, and amazingly also carbon polluters during the plowing and so forth. And it seems that this is an action of civil society that is helping in all the sectors because of the contradictions of your spheres, perhaps. So do you have any thoughts on how to deal with when there's contradictions and how to deal with that?
The way that this came up in the research for my book wasn't necessarily, I should say, it came up in a lot of the conversations I had around supply chain and how to ensure that there's responsible supply chains. And what a few of the people I talked to found is that just because a country may have effective laws on the books around, human rights, environmental rights, so on and so forth, obviously they don't mean anything unless those are enforced, and unless, kind of in your framework, unless civil society is united behind ensuring that not only the spirit but also the letter of that law is enforced. And so when countries start to backslide on that, that's when there's greater opportunity for malfeasance, poor ethics, violations of law to take place. And so, to get to your specific point about soil conservation, there's an important entity in existence that was created by laws, created through public policy, but civil society is not allowing that entity to flourish and to do its job. And I think that's then where what a lot of people have said to me is that more and more, if we want the laws and the policies around sustainable markets to really, really have teeth, to have meaning in them, the private sector needs to work as hard in pushing the public sector to either create or maintain those laws as it does in seeking policy outcomes that benefit the bottom line of their business. And so more and more people in the cause sector are trying to hold the private sector accountable for public policy kind of writ large around, sustainable issues, rather than just, again, expecting these companies to just focus on narrow policies that only impact their bottom line. And so in my view, any of these companies that hold themselves out as these incredibly responsible citizens operating in a sustainable manner, when the rubber meets the road and they're kind of lobbying against that, acting against public policy that has a common good, I don't necessarily see them as a truly sustainable company. You're now into a gray area of greenwashing as far as I'm concerned.